welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today's the weekend review show for August 23rd through the 25th, 2019. We have three new wide releases to talk about: Angel Has Fallen, Overcomer, and Ready or Not. So we'll do a little bit deeper dives on those as we walk through the top 10. We also have coming back is the Wildline Time Machine feature with Chris. He's going to be talking about the 20 years ago, the Sixth Sense, Bowfinger, Mickey Blue Eyes weekend at the box office back then. It was kind of a crazy, that was a weird year, 1999. Super odd. A lot of amazing films, but a lot of films like Mickey Blue Eyes, which, you know, Chris will talk about, nobody remembers. And then he's going to talk a little bit about what's coming out here in the future: Uncharted, Ghost Draft, and Coming to America, three new movies that are in production or starting production soon. So that'll be in the timeline or time machine feature coming up here after we walk through the top 10. And then I will close out this show by talking about what's going to happen here at the end of the summer. And maybe do like a little light fall preview here for September and see what's going on. But let's walk through the top 10 right now for August 23rd to the 25th, 2019. Number one this weekend was Angel Has Fallen, 21.25 million. That's actually gone up from estimates. The estimate yesterday was just like 20, and Deadline was saying maybe 19.5. So it actually overperformed, it sounds like, Saturday night. So this is Gerard Butler, London Has Fallen, Olympus Has Fallen, the third in the movie of these series of like, they're like cheap B action movies is the best thing that you can call them. They're not good. They're not good movies or films by any stretch of the imagination. But they make some money and people show up to see them, and the general audience tends to really like these movies. It's a Lionsgate. This is such a Lionsgate movie. And so doing 21.25 million is actually pretty darn good. I think the expectation here was high teens, low 20s. The fact that they hit 20 is going to make Lionsgate very happy. If you look back at the other two films, so the original Olympus Has Fallen, and also remember, what was the other movie, White House Down? So this is one of those situations, this is back in 2013, when essentially you had the same movie made by two different studios, which happens fairly often when you think about it. Volcano versus Armageddon, Deep Impact, Volcano versus Dante's Peak, and then Armageddon versus Deep Impact. And like that was what, mid-90s, 96, 97 era. So it does happen when the studios, they both have basically a similar script and say, hey, let's both make these, and they kind of compete with each other to see which one will do better. Olympus Has Fallen did pretty well, opened up at 30.3 million back in March 2013, which is 6 years ago plus now. Total gross was $98 million. Although these tend to have a little bit better legs overseas, that one didn't. That one was a 58% domestic take, 41% foreign take, but the second one had a very high foreign take. This is London Has Fallen. That came out 3 years after the original, March 2016. Opened lower at 21, closed out at 62 in the US and Canada, but worldwide did 205 worldwide, 30% domestic to 70% foreign take. Did $143 million overseas, which makes sense because it's London Has Fallen. Sure, there's probably a big market for this in the UK, but my guess is that it did pretty well across the world. Just because you got to remember that audiences in, say, Brazil, Russia, China have completely different tastes than they do in the US and Canada. And hell, Canada and US have totally different tastes as well. But the sort of splashy action movies tend to do better overseas than they do here. Why is that? I don't know. But that is what it is. So this one, Angel, has a really strong start here domestically. I do expect it to have a very similar, although one could argue, so Olympus Has Fallen was very much obviously centered on the White House and the US president. I think Angel Has Fallen is kind of similar. I think it takes place in the US. I don't know. I saw the trailer. The trailer was cool as shit because it had this like amazing drone attack sequence. And you're like, yeah, I want to see that. Like anybody who likes movies at all or action movies, like I'm going to see that. And I'm going to see Angel Has Fallen. I'm not going to go to the theater and pay for it, but I'm going to get it on VOD or whatever. So it had a really cool trailer. The multiplier here is probably going to be a 3x because the other two were 3x. So you're looking at low 60s. It should hit that London Has Fallen number like right on the bullseye, about $62 million. Let's take a look at the quality here really quick on this one. Rotten Tomatoes score 39%. From critics, 50 out of 100. I mean, these are terrible scores. The situation here is that it's a critic bullseye. They hate these movies. Although Mark Kermode, who is if you have a chance, listen to his on YouTube, his BBC review of this film, because he just loves to like rip these movies apart. But this one he kind of liked, and he has an amazing Nick Nolte impression in the video. So go watch that on. Just look up Mark Kermode, Angel Has Fallen, you'll find it. So critics hate this movie in general. Verified audience score very high, 94%. Actual score 92 out of 100. That is really good. All audience score very similar, 90%, 85 out of 100. Cinema score of an A-, post track of a 90, 64% definite recommend. So what we're seeing here is the traditional separation between critics and audiences. This is not a critical film. And what do we mean by that? There's nothing really here that is meaty or artistically rich. It's just not. And it's not really meant for that. It's meant for you to buy a ticket, go in, see a spectacle, be entertained, and go home. It's escapism 101 is what it is. And it works on that level, and it is working on that level with the audiences. A 94% verified audience score is fantastic. A- cinema score. The post-track score is the most surprising one, to 90%. And a 64% definite recommend is fantastic. So it's just a really good release at the right time of the year. Is it breaking out? No, it's not breaking out. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. They have already sold the rights to this movie overseas. So in terms of making money on it, we're looking at production budget was 60 on London, and this one it was only 40. Deadline is saying that they might have cut a huge airline crash or whatever to save that 20 million. So this one's going to be looking pretty good, but it's 100% dependent on that foreign take. If it does not do well overseas, it might not make money. Domestically here is kind of just the cherry on top that it's doing well. It's really going to depend on those foreign markets. In terms of what the I was going to call them the film vanguard for right now. Letterboxd people, what they thought, 58 out of 100, similar to Olympus Has Fallen, which was 54. London Has Fallen to 48. I kind of agree with that. I liked Olympus Has Fallen. It was just so over the top. The opening sequence of Olympus Has Fallen is why you go to see action movies, because it makes zero sense and it's freaking awesome. The thing where the huge like plane is like has like that chain gun just like blowing. I mean, it's so good. Just like ripping apart DC. London Has Fallen was like kind of cool, but it just seems way over the top from the start to the point where it's like you really have to suspend your belief, and it's like it was farcical and fantastic essentially, and so it just didn't really connect as well as Olympus Has Fallen. So 48 on that one. Hobbs and Shaw did a 60 to kind of compare to other action movies recently. Spider-Man Far From Home, kind of the high mark for the year, I would say, for action. 76 out of 100 from the Letterboxd crew. So I think with this one, there's no real surprises here. I think the performance is very good. Like I said, foreign sales covered $30 million on the budget. It should hopefully take 60 to 70% of its take should be foreign. That'll get it to the point where it's pretty profitable. In terms of the audience, this one 51% male, 49% female. That seems kind of low for the male audience. I wasn't expecting almost like a 60-40 male-female split here. But I think Gerard Butler probably has a female following, doesn't he? 50% white, 23% Latino, 15% African American, 12% Asian other. No real call-outs there. Slightly over-index on African American and definitely an over-index on Asian other. They really got to expand Asian other. We're like, what the hell does Asian other mean? Like, is it East Asian? Is it South Asian? And what is other? What is that even? Just ridiculous. But I get what they're doing. It's good to have the data than nothing. Okay, so overall, Angel Has Fallen. My guess is right in line with London Has Fallen, 62-ish here, and then a big hefty take for it overseas. I think a big win here is if maybe it can like leg out a little bit in the U.S. I don't know if that's going to happen just because we're at the end of the summer, right? So this is the doldrums of August. This is it. This is the definition of the gutter slot at the box office. Nothing is going to happen for the next 2 weeks until It Too comes out. So it does have some runway, I just don't know if it's going to break that 60 range, maybe get to 70. And then worldwide, I think it's definitely got to get over 200. If it can get to 220, 230, that would be a big win for this. So I think this is sort of like the bread and butter of the movie business, as a movie like Angel Has Fallen. They packaged it very well. They knew exactly what they were doing when they're going to release it. They know who their audience is. They hit that target demographic, and it's doing well. So it's going to make some money, it looks like. But that was number one at the weekend, for the weekend of August 23rd to the 25th. Number two was Good Boys, its second weekend, 11.75 million, a 45% drop, which is pretty good. It was looking closer to a 50% drop as of yesterday. So it's performed. It was a really strong Saturday afternoon and night, it sounds like, maybe because the weather cooled off a bit. Theater count went up somehow to 3,353, up 149 theaters. I don't get that. Maybe because it performed so well last weekend. Per theater average in its second weekend is $3,500. Total take so far for Good Boys is $42 million. This one's a win. Like, I don't think Universal could have expected anything that much different from this movie. Doesn't really have a foreign take yet. Just like 6 million. I imagine it hasn't opened up on a lot of areas. Also, keep in mind, comedies do not play well outside their home territory, just because comedy is so culturally contextual, especially a movie like this. So I don't think it's gonna have a big foreign take. But the budget was only $20 million. They threw it out in August just to see what would happen, and I think it's doing quite well. And a 45% drop on its second weekend is actually really great for a movie like this. So that was number two. Number three was Overcomer, from Affirm. This is a faith-based film. And it was one of those weird movies where it's like it has this built-in audience who's gonna love it no matter what. I didn't know anything about it, so I had to watch the trailer. And I was like, oh yeah, this is like a typical faith-based sports movie. There's a lot of faith-based sports movies. That's almost like a whole subgenre within faith films. And I wonder why that is. I guess it's like something to do with like overcoming odds, and I don't know what it has to do with Christianity and Jesus. Like, what in this movie, it's like a girl who is running cross country, and she's the only one who's coming out for cross country, and there's this coach who has to take it over, and I didn't really get the plot from the trailer. It's kind of bizarre. I was like, what the hell does that have to do with Jesus? Pardon my français there. So I don't know. But these are basically critic proof. Overcomer did 38% on Rotten Tomatoes, 51 out of 100. So critics hated it, of course. If I was a critic and I watched this, I would probably rip it to shreds. Verified audience score, 99%. A 99% on a verified audience score. Those are people who had bought tickets on Fandango, went to go see it. 99% of those people gave it, I guess, 100%. I don't know how that works. 98 out of 100 is the actual score. I've never seen a score even remotely that high. A+ cinema score. No post-track, no definite recommend. All audience score from Rotten Tomatoes, 97%, 96 out of 100. So what we have here, and the faith-based films are the definition of critic proof. People who go to see these films go to see it for one reason. They're Christian, and they want to see a decent movie. Doesn't have to be a good movie, doesn't have to be crafted all that well. Just a decent movie that reaffirms their beliefs and makes them feel good about their beliefs, and talks about Jesus and faith and stuff like that. So what's interesting about Overcomer or movies like this is that it's almost like a completely different product than we're used to at the box office, right? On one level. But on another level, it's kind of, when you think about it, it's pretty genius marketing and product creation and placement, because it's basically like, that a couple million people are going to come out to see this, and they're going to love it and gush about it to all their friends. And usually their friends are also Christians because they meet people through the church. It's like the central social organizing tool for a lot of people. So it's just it's a really weird product, though, at the end of the day, because it doesn't matter what a critic says about it, but at the same time, that has this built-in audience, right? There's a huge cap. There's a massive cap to this audience. There's a brick wall outside the Christian, and tends to be evangelical Christian, to be specific, audience here. And that's why, Overcomer, 8.2 million for the weekend, only in 1,700 theaters, which makes sense because it's such a specific demographic. Per theater average was $4,700. Total gross, obviously $8,200,000 so far. Budget was only $5 million. So these are kind of like almost like Blumhouse movies, where you have this audience, you have a really low budget, you throw it out there, and it's going to make some cash. But it's not going to go anywhere. Like Overcomer's not going to make $50 million. At most, it's probably going to make, it's going to have a good multiplier, at least 3x of 24. And also, it's not going to have an international audience. Zero. Despite the fact that there's billions of Christians, people around the world. These are specifically for United States Christian evangelicals, which is a very, it's a specific subset of Christianity. It's kind of dwindling. It has been. They seem like they're a lot bigger than they are in terms of share of demographics, but they're only about, I want to say like 24% of Americans would consider themselves evangelical, maybe 23% Christian. So it's a big chunk, but it's not like 50% like we sometimes feel if you really follow politics a lot. They have a big voice in politics and it feels like they're everywhere all the time. But they are kind of a little bit of a niche demographic. But this, in terms of success, I mean, it's a $5 million budget. Who knows how much they spent to market this thing? I don't know if this thing's going to make money because the economics are so different. Is this a good performance? I think it's an okay performance. The issue here is that per theater average. Like you only opened it in 1,700 theaters. That's great. But 4,700? Angel Has Fallen is an okay performance because it's in 3,286 theaters and it has a 6,500 per theater average. If you push this film up to that level, I doubt it would hit 3,500. I doubt it would hit 3,000. So that would be a huge flop. So it's one of those things where in the context of thinking about like nobody knows who this movie is outside the Christian world, like it's kind of a win. But if you think about it in terms of like the broader spectrum of box office performance, it's not doing very well. Its saving grace, pun intended always, is the $5 million production budget. And I don't know, is it good enough that A+ cinema score? That's another thing that kind of irks me about these films a little bit, is that there's no way to tell if it's good or bad. I mean, objectively, it's bad, right? The critics hate it. And they probably have their knives out for movies like this. I would. But when you look at the audience score, a 99% verified audience score, that's absurd. That's delusional. An A+ cinema score, also delusional. And why do I say it's delusional? The people going to see this don't care whether it's good or not. They're going to give it an A+ because it talks about Jesus and makes them feel good. And so it's just a very different animal than the other films that we're following. Like a horror film like Ready or Not we'll look at. People don't go to Ready or Not knowing that they're going to love it and give it an A+ no matter what it is, as long as there's like a slasher scene, right? It's not religious in that sense. And so a B+ for Ready or Not is actually really freaking good for a horror movie, but it's also pretty honest. There's nothing honest about an A+ score for this movie or Overcomer. It's just people showing up and basically it'd be like going to McDonald's and getting like a value meal, whatever you call them, yeah, combo. And basically someone asking you afterwards, did you eat food? And like, if you said yes, that's an A+. I mean, that's essentially what the survey is for Overcomer. It's just so ridiculous. But it is quite fascinating. 64% female here, 36% male. That's insane. That's like way over indexed on the female audience. 45% over 45, very high, older. 60% Caucasian, 21% Latino, 13% African American, 6% Asian other. Over indexed on the white folks, essentially. A little bit under indexed on Latino, which is strange because a lot of Latinos are Catholic. But again, this may be more for evangelicals. Sorry, this is like a religious lesson. What am I doing? Played really well in the Midwest and South, which makes sense. But yeah, it is a fascinating. I can only imagine is another example of one of these movies that actually do really well and had a great multiplier. And I believe one of the actresses in this was also in that. But they are interesting, compared to the other. I can only imagine did a 64 on Letterboxd. War Room, which is from the same directors, like a couple years ago, maybe. Got a 50 in Letterboxd. It's got a 64. Not really a film Vanguard, film Twitter type film, is it? So I'm surprised it actually got a 64. In any event, so that's Overcomer. Where's this thing going to drop next weekend? I have no clue. Faith Films are just bizarre. It's going to have a good word of mouth. It was kind of a depressed opening. It's not a great opening, I think, is at the end of the day. It's like not a huge win. But like it makes some money because the budget's so low. I would guess probably a 50% drop, pretty average. A+ cinema score though, Might be low, might be a 30% drop. If it goes below 40%, then I'm going to keep an eye on it and talk about it. If it doesn't, then I'm just going to ignore it until this summer's over. Okay, so that was number 3. Let's move on to number 4 here. In the number 4 slot, we have Lion King with 8.1 million, 33% drop, fantastic drop. Starting to lose some theaters, lost 260 theaters. Per theater average is about $2,500, and its 6th weekend, $510 million domestically for Lion King. Unbelievable performance. 1.5 billion worldwide. I've talked about this one way too much in the past. I think, look, it's a huge win financially. I think it was a big misstep by Disney to do it in the way that they did it. I think it hurts their long-term prospects for the live reimagining or remake situation that they've created, because the end product here is not very good, and everybody will acknowledge that. Even people who love the original Lion King and are Disney stans, they're gonna go see this and be like, "Nah, whatever." It was not needed, but financially, the biggest of grand slams. Number 5, Fast and the Furious, Hobbs and Shaw, 8.1 million as well, 42% drop, down to about 400 and off about 450 theaters now. Per theater average, also $2,500 per theater. This one it's really hard to read this one. I don't know which way it's going. I just don't. And every week I approach it, I was like, I just don't know what to think about this. Worldwide, it sits at $588 million. I think the break even was supposed to be $600 million. So what has happened is this thing has performed very well overseas. Very, very well. In China specifically, I was trying to follow the Chinese news this week. I think it was was it a record breaker? Maybe. And that was the bet here. The bet here was that bet on China because they love movies like this and they are kind of eating it up right now. And China is just going to become more and more powerful in the world box office market. Let's see if I got some numbers on the Chinese take so far. So it's essentially approaching profitability according to the early deadline sources from other studios that said $600 million was the profitable sort of range here. And of course, come on, you don't give me Chinese totals. This is ridiculous. Come on, Box Office Mojo, they're dropping the ball here. But I do know it's doing quite well over there. So $600 million. Let me do my quick back of the napkin math here. So it's $600 million right now. Let's just assume, let's give it the benefit of the doubt and say it ends at 650. So the total take there is usually going to be in revenue throughout the entire lifespan of the film, at least the next 5 years, probably all the way through basic cable revenues. You're looking at about 87%. So it's going to take in about $565 million, maybe rounded up to $600 million. Production budget was $200 million. And I know the marketing budget was massive. I think I quoted 160. I think it was more 120. Total cost in general for a film like this are going to be 3x. And I don't mean there's this old rule 2.5x. That's bullshit. That's not what it is. You got to just do more research and look into it more. But like the total cost for releasing this thing on every platform from the moment it hits the theater to the moment it hits FX or whatever basic cable channel it's going to play on in like 2 years is about 3x total. So this is essentially the break-even point that they talked about is about right. $600 million is the break-even point, and it's approaching that. But it's not going to be a huge profitable film. So I think at the end of the day, we can make a kind of somewhat final read here on Hobbs and Shaw. It's not a huge win. It's not a huge loss. It's kind of like a single where the tie goes to the runner. Like they just made it on base there. And that's surprising to me for a lot of reasons. But the biggest one is, I brought this up like I think every week. Why are you spending $200 million in an August movie like this? You know it's not top tier. You know it's not the A story, right? So why are you spending $200 million on this and then a huge marketing budget worldwide? Because right now they're not going to make the $100 million in profit, $200 million in profit they should for something like this. So it's a little bit of a misstep, I think, by Universal. Not a massive misstep. It's not like it's flopping. It's not like they're going to lose money necessarily, but they're not going to make the profit they probably expected. So it is definitely an underperformance, I would say, on that level. Okay, so that was number 5. Number 6 was Ready or Not, a new one from Fox Searchlight. 7.5 million here. This one, remember, opened up Wednesday nights. Really kind of bizarre Wednesday opening at the end of summer here. Per theater average for this weekend was $2,600. Total take so far for Ready or Not is 10.5 million. Let's see what the critics said. 87% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics. Wow. 82% from top critics. Actual score of 72 out of 100. That's incredibly high for a horror film. So critics really like it. It sounds like it's a pretty good film. Verified audience score 82%, which is great. 81 out of 100. Actual score. All audience 83%, also an 81 out of 100. Audiences also like it. B+ cinema score. For horror movies, give it an extra bump of a grade or half a grade, so it's more like an A-. I don't know why, but horror fans, for some reason, just always undergraded a bit. There's a curve. Post track of a 70, which is great. No definite recommend score now. Letterboxd 72, which is strong. And I think that so this one's a weird movie, and Deadline goes into a lot of information about it. I'm going to give you kind of my own read on it. I think they're very negative in their viewpoint of this performance. Only $6.5 million budget. Marketing was probably decently high because nobody knows anybody in this movie. They're kind of releasing in a weird spot, so I think they had kind of over marketed a bit. It's the widest release ever for Fox Searchlight, 2,855 theaters. In terms of who showed up this weekend, 53% female, 47% male. That's already a red flag to me. So with this movie, you have this very beautiful lead character. Kind of looks a lot like Margot Robbie. I would expect the male crowd to show up a lot more for this. Normal movie breakdown audience is 53% male, 47% female. This is reversed a little bit, so definitely under an X on the male. I would have expected 55% male, 60% male, 78% under 35, which is good. So they got the young audience. Females showed up a little bit more than males in terms of the racial breakdown. 46% white, 24% Latino, 14% African American, 60% Asian other. Over-indexed here on the Asian other category. Under-indexed on the white category, which I find really fascinating for a movie like this, because this Fox Searchlight is like, it's almost like borderline. They do a lot of art house stuff, a ton of art house stuff. And I'm really concerned that Disney is taking them over, because I was looking through their release history. Wow. Like Little Miss Sunshine, Juno, Grand Budapest Hotel, Shape of Water, The Favorite. I mean, they have really been a powerhouse in bringing really interesting, kind of sometimes experimental art films to the masses, and doing it in a really, really interesting way, and getting people engaged, so that like a person in the middle of like Nebraska would be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go see The Favorite, or I'm gonna go see Shape of Water. Like they really sort of on some level mastered how to market a niche art product to a large group of people in the US and Canada. So I'm really interested to see what they do. And I think on some level Disney brings up the fact, Deadline brings up the fact that Disney kind of let this film, like kind of like Stuber, another Fox sort of inherited film that they got. They just didn't, for some reason, Disney is not really pushing these movies. I think for some reason, because they think they're kind of adopted. Disney didn't greenlight them. It was a Fox product. I don't know. But with this one, $6.5 million within the context of what was of the timing of the release and the budget, $6.5 million budget. We're in the absolute worst time to put out a movie all year. It doesn't seem that awful to me that it's only did 10.5 so far. Way below what they wanted for it. Obviously, it's not breaking out at all. I had one of the better trailers of the year, by the way. So really buzzy trailer. But it sounds like it's a combination of Disney just not pushing it in the right ways. I think Deadline brings up a good point. Why was this not screamed at Comic-Con in San Diego? Like, why? This is the perfect movie for that audience. Or South by Southwest, or it probably wasn't done by then, but something like that. One of those conventions. Nerd conventions, as we used to call them. So it's definitely an underperformance to expectation. But I think given the circumstances, given how they marketed it, given the release slot, I don't think it's that bad a performance at all. I think it's actually okay. And this one will be a really good digital release. This is totally a VOD film and streaming film. So I think it's okay. I don't think they're going to lose a lot of money off of it. They're not going to make a lot of money off of it, but it kind of seems like a push overall financially. In any event, we'll keep our eye on that one. But it's coming out in 2 weeks, so this thing's kind of probably done, and next weekend's going to be crickets. So that was number 6. Number 7 was Angry Birds 2, 38% drop, 6.3 million. That's a good drop. $27 million so far. This one is, it's a huge flop, massive flop for Sony. I don't know what they were thinking making this movie. End of story. Number 8 was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark from Lionsgate, 40% drop on its third weekend, $2,000 per theater, starting to lose theaters, lost 200 theaters. Total take so far for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, $50 million, which I think is pretty good for that movie. $25 million production budget. Does have a foreign release. It's sitting at 72 worldwide right now. Not a huge win, not a grand slam, but definitely like a double for that movie. That's a good performance. Especially because the trailer was so bad for that movie. And as someone who grew up with those books, I was like, oh, they've ruined this movie. Then I saw it, then I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. So I think they doing the best with what they had here in an August release, and I think it's a good performance. Number 9 was Dora and the Lost City of Gold, 5.2 million, 39% drop, lost 900 theaters, per theater average $1,800. This one is being called a big flop. I guess $49 million production budget. That's what I'm hearing. What's the foreign take on this one? Oh, not big. That's why. I mean, I guess there's no foreign market for this. There should be a foreign market for this. It's a huge TV show. Maybe it wasn't overseas. So $60 million worldwide so far. Yeah, I kind of get why it's underperforming. I just didn't expect that much out of that movie. It's kind of delivering to my expectations, which is not very high. Okay, so that's Dora the Explorer not doing all that well. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, still in the top 10, $5 million, 35% drop in its 5th weekend. Very good. Total take so far 123 domestically. Is this thing really rolling out yet foreign wise? It is rolling out foreign. Wow, okay. So 123 domestic, 116 foreign take. So this thing's sitting at 240 right now. So that changes the story a lot. I thought this thing was not going to have a huge foreign take, but it looks like it might do pretty well. I don't think it's open in foreign markets until like last weekend. So this is just the start of it. This is doing quite well. This is doing surprisingly well. It did well domestically, but I wasn't sure that was going to overcome that $90 million budget and big marketing spend. But if it continues to perform this way on the foreign markets, yeah, it's going to make money for Sony, and it could be a big win. Definitely a huge win for Quentin Tarantino. He's not going to retire. Come on. They're not going to let him retire after this performance. Okay, so that's the top 10, folks. Before we move on to the Chris's timeline, where he's going to talk about Sixth Sense and back in 1999 and a couple of new films in production, let's see if anything else strikes our fancy to talk about. How about Peanut Butter Falcon? So that was a limited release. I told everybody to watch. It went wide-ish, added 942 theaters, so it's basically just shy of 1,000 per theater average on its wide release, $3,000. So it's going nowhere. Which is unfortunate. Roadside Attractions release, they don't always do it all so well with these rollouts. But what's interesting there is had fantastic, I think an A+ private cinema score when it first got started. I don't know how they do that. Do they like hire a cinema score person to come out and like survey the 5 theaters? But all the numbers are looking really good for this. It's unfortunate that they tried to push it out wide. This is something I come to constantly in the podcast. Why are you pushing out this movie wide in its first 3 weekends? To me, this is something where it's like, it's not even, there's all these different tiers of platform releases. This is not a platform release or art house release that you can force to 1,000 theaters. This is something that would take months to do that, I feel like. And they rushed it. And it happens all the time with these movies. They think they have a hit in their hands because it did well in 20 theaters, and let's push it out to 1,000, and all of a sudden it's not as pretty. And that's not because it's not a good movie, and that's not because there isn't a huge audience for this movie out there. It's just the awareness is not there on this movie. It's just not. I know about it. Other people know about it because you follow the industry and you know what's going on and you read this stuff. I doubt somebody in the middle of the country or down in like Jacksonville, Florida knows about this movie. They just don't, because the marketing footprint isn't there. And so when you push it out wide, it doesn't have the wind being, behind its sails to really get going. So this is going nowhere, unfortunately, which is really a shame, because it sounds like it's a fantastic movie, could have a lot of Oscar buzz, but the financial sort of, if it fails like it seems like it's doing right now, that hurts its awards chances a lot. What else? Anything else? Where'd you go, Bernadette? DOA, 6.5 million total. It is just in free fall. Brittany Runs a Marathon from Amazon. They pushed that out into 5 theaters. Wait a second. This is a pretty good performance. How is nobody talking about this? Like, I read through these articles and I didn't see anything about it. So Brittany Runs a Marathon, it's an Amazon studio release, pushed out in 5 theaters, 1 extra than your typical New York, Los Angeles platform situation. But $35,000 per theater in 5 theaters on your opening weekend, that's not bad. That's actually borderline breakout. Once you get to like 45, 50 per theater on that 4 to 5 screen or theater release, you're looking at a pretty good possibility of a breakout. I don't know about this one, but keep your eye on that because that's very surprising because I had heard nothing about it, hardly any marketing whatsoever. So something's happening there. Like that may be word of mouth or something. I don't know. We're going to keep an eye on that one because that is a really good sign for that movie. Anything else? 47 Meters Down I watched last weekend. Oh god, terrible. So bad. That's in free fall as well. $15 million. It's not going to make anywhere close to what the original did, which was a huge surprise. Blinded by the Light. I knew this one was going to flop, but I'm still pissed about it because it looks like such a good movie. And Warner Brothers has got to be super disappointed. $900 in its second weekend per theater average. It's sitting at 8.2 million. That's a wretched performance for that movie. There's a huge like bidding war over Blinded by the Light Sundance, and now it's just completely DOA in August. Anything else limited? Not really. God, that Brittany Runs a Marathon thing is really surprising to me. I gotta keep a close eye on that one. Okay, so now it is time for the timeline segment. Or sorry, I would say timeline. Why am I saying timeline? It's time machine. It's the Wildline Time Machine with Chris. Here we go.
Hey, this is the Wildline Time Machine. My name's Chris. Every week here, I have been looking back at the past of the American box office and also its questionable future. This week, I've got a doozy for you. Looking back 20 years ago, 1999, obviously there's been a lot of talk recently. There's been think pieces on Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. There has been anniversary and then sequel launching of The Matrix. And yet, this week featured neither of those. This is the August doldrums, but there was a surprise sleeper hit that almost everyone remembers if you were probably a 7 or older in this time period. I'm talking, yes, about M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense. It was number 1 at the box office 20 years ago with 23.9 million and was number 1 for the 3rd week in a row. This is a movie that, if you don't recall, had a production budget of only 40 mil. Yes, it had the star power of Bruce Willis, but this kind of up-and-coming director that not a lot of people knew about was trying to reinvent the horror genre and also slap a PG-13 label on it, which arguably led to this whole glut of PG-13 horror movies in the 2000s and continuing on in the 2010s. This was a movie that, like I said, production budget was 40. It made over 293 domestic. That is an insane number multiplier. And not only that, but its drops from week to week were incredible. You wouldn't hear of anything like this nowadays. I can't remember the last time Dan said anything even, twice as much of this, but you had a 7% drop here on its 3rd week of release. Of course, word of mouth was kind of the big propeller of this film's success, and the twist ending and people trying to piece together, how the twist ending was foreshadowed earlier in the film. Multiple showings, multiple viewings by the audience, and it was just a powerhouse, absolutely intense. And once again, all of these numbers, as we do the past segment on the Wildline Time Machine, are unadjusted. Number 2 that weekend was, we've talked about Steve Martin's studio comedy run in the 80s and early 90s, but this was kind of his attempt at staying with it. Number 2 was Bowfinger, directed by Frank Oz, once again produced by Brian Grazer, who produced Parenthood, which we discussed last week. That was Steve Martin's breakout hit of 1989. Bowfinger did not quite nearly do as well, though it was definitely hyped at the time. I remember people talking about it, like reinventing the studio comedy, making it completely meta and this powerhouse team up of Steve Martin and Eddie Murphy, but actually only made a little over 66 million, with a production budget of 55 million with its powerhouse co-stars. That's not a huge profit turn. It's not terrible, and clearly I think that things could have gone much worse, but it was an indicator of things to come. This is once again a guy whose movie Parenthood, basically about nothing, just a family dramedy, made over 100 million 10 years prior. So I think Steve Martin was trying to, this was PG-13. He was going a little more edgy. He was kind of bringing some of the absurdity of The Jerk back. This is also the year that American Pie came out. So people were looking for those old vanguard comedians like Martin and Murphy to try to keep up with the current trends. I don't remember it being a great movie, but I don't remember it being bad either. It was kind of, a competent studio comedy, but you're not seeing these happen nowadays, as I discussed last week. In fact, just today, Disney Plus announced that it's having like a huge comedic holiday movie starring Bill Hader and Anna Kendrick come out exclusively on Disney Plus. And of course, Adam Sandler is staying home on Netflix. There's little to no money to be made by doing these in the actual cinema, which is unfortunate. Some of the best experiences I have in my movie going past is laughing along with a bunch of strangers in the middle of the dark, but that seems to be not where the business is going. It's not blockbuster driven. Number 3 that week in the box office, speaking of not blockbuster driven, this was a movie that I totally forgot about and I never saw. This is number 3 was a new release, did not get higher than number 3 that week. It was Mickey Blue Eyes with just a little over 10 million on its opening weekend. This is a movie that cost $75 million, almost twice as much of what Sixth Sense cost. And it's a movie that only made in its final domestic run, not even 34 million. Ouch. That's horrendous. Of course, you look at 33 mil nowadays and it's, not that horrible of a take, especially if you're looking at like a generic rom-com, studio comedy. Probably Dan wouldn't rip it that much if it ended up with 33. But when you're spending the 75 mil to get Hugh Grant on the screen at the height of his career, or, this is maybe like the beginning of his downturn. The scandal with the prostitute, I believe, happened in 95, where it was like really at the height of his popularity, but he managed to keep his English charm, and this was kind of the beginning of the end for him, I think. Of course, it doesn't help that you have a studio comedy that's like this mob comedy, which was like it's almost its own subgenre back in the 80s, but I don't think anybody was looking for something akin to My Blue Heaven, and of course we look at how Steve Martin is doing over those years. I'm not sure what they were going for here. This is a Frank Oz directed movie, and this was kind of not his death knell, so to speak, but it was definitely kind of him realizing that the business doesn't work the way it used to. And it's too bad because, of course, Frank Oz is a very talented guy, though arguably better at acting than he is at directing and voice work. Of course, he's iconic for, but it's just amazing. Like Hugh Grant has come back from all of this, of course, with Paddington 2 kind of being his what he's been calling, and there was a big profile in Vanity Fair where he discussed it as perhaps the best movie he's ever made. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I can't think of a Hugh Grant movie I enjoy more. I mean, perhaps you could argue that, gosh, I don't know. I'm looking at this. Notting Hill was probably his best other movie. 9 Months, maybe. 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Like, he had his thing that he was doing, and now he's trying to expand himself a little more, going into the kids' movies. He was in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. 4 years ago. So who knows where Hugh Grant's trajectory is going, but it seems like he's trying to mount a comeback. He also had that big role in A Very English Scandal, which is up for a bunch of Emmys, Stephen Frears miniseries. We shall see. Okay, so let's turn from the past and look toward the future now. I'm going to look at 3 films that this week, I'm not going to look at trailers that were dropped. We're not going to look at movies that just started filming. I'm going to look at movies that officially are a go. They have been greenlit. They were in the news this week for better or worse. And the first one I'd like to discuss, completely original IP, sci-fi thriller, so it's got one thing going for it but not the other, but you never know. Perhaps there's some quality here, but here's the reason I wanted to talk about this. We talked about how the studio comedy's dying, but that doesn't mean that comedians are struggling in the film business. The weird thing about this movie, the big news this week on Deadline, was that stand-up comedian Theo Vaughn joins Chris Pratt in this sci-fi thriller, which maybe has some, Marvel-esque comic relief, but for all intents and purposes is like perhaps a tentpole movie, or if not a tentpole movie, definitely like a, cash grab movie. Like, it's not trying to do much other than, use special effects. It's what is this log line? It's so weird. A husband and father drafted to fight a future in which the fate of humanity rely on his ability to correct issues of the past. So like Minority Report meets Battle Los Angeles. I have no idea. It sounds bad. It does not sound good. It just sounds really generic, but, kind of a cash grab. Maybe not tentpole, but like you put Chris Pratt in there and, the star of Guardians of the Galaxy and Jurassic World, you think it's probably upper echelon, but I don't know. And then you've got this stand-up comedian who's never been in a movie, but has sold out his tour and has a podcast with 5 million subscribers. I've never heard of this guy. I have no idea if he's funny or not. He kind of looks like Dane Cook mixed with Vin Diesel. So I mean, it seems like he's primed for a presence on screen, but it's just strange to me that Paramount and Skydance are gambling on this. Speaking of Paramount, by the way, the supporting cast of this also seems pretty solid. Yvonne Strahovski, J.K. Simmons, Betty Gilpin. Like, this is a movie that is trying to like take some names that both have, quality behind them. J.K. Simmons, as well as, a diverse spread of dramatic action actors like Yvonne Strahovski to the comedic actors like Theo Von and Chris Pratt. Who knows what they're doing here? I cannot imagine this being a hit. If I had to guess, I'll do my prediction for next year's Ghost Draft as maybe 40 million tops. I think it's going to be a flop. I do not think anybody's clamoring for something as generic as this. But I've been proven wrong before. I doubt the Jurassic World movies were going to be a flop. Okay, so coming up next, I want to look at a video game adaptation that has been dominating the Hollywood news. Dan Trachtenberg's Uncharted is no longer Dan Trachtenberg's Uncharted. The guy who got big from 10 Cloverfield Lane and managed to take this silly J.J. Abrams concept and shoehorn it into his own kind of bedroom thriller I wasn't a fan of it. There's a lot of people that were. I think Dan was, but it seems like this is the kind of guy you'd take as a studio hand. Be like, oh, you went with our bullshit last time, so try something else. How about you take this video game? Obviously, video game movies have a notorious reputation for just sinking the box office and being flops, but they keep trying them. Jones than Tomb Raider, but it remains to be seen, especially with the drama that Dan Trachtenberg has now dropped out. I'd imagine perhaps, Sony thought that they were going to be able to mold and use him like they did John Watts in the Spider-Man series, but I think maybe Trachtenberg has a little bit of a subversive current in him, so it does not seem like this is going to follow the model of something a little more outside the box, and maybe they're going to pick somebody kind of like they did with Peyton Reed when Edgar Wright dropped out of the Ant-Man production. Who knows what this could do? I do think that it's ripe to be adapted. People have been talking about it being turned into movies ever since the game came out. I'm not a gamer at all, but it looks beautiful in terms of video game graphics and setting and just like the sense of adventure that a movie like this could kind of hopefully wash the bad taste of Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull out of our mouths. But who knows? If I had to guess my projection for if this movie ever actually gets made, PlayStation and Sony put out a release saying that they are narrowing in on Trachtenberg's replacement. But who knows if that's just bluster to calm stockholders. Whatever, we'll see. I'm guessing this is the kind of movie that will not go above 70 mil. Looking lastly, this is probably the release for the future I'm looking forward to the most that I'm talking about today. It is the sequel to, I just mentioned Eddie Murphy earlier, so we're going to come full circle. He's mounting another comeback, first with My Name is Dolomite, the Netflix release movie coming out later this fall, but then also coming to America. That's the number 2, yes, the sequel to the 80s hit about Prince Akeem traveling to the U.S. and falling in love. One of my favorite 80s movies, hands down. It's just positively spellbinding still today. And I think that it's both hilarious and touching and also kind of progressive for its time period, even in kind of a regressive kind of way. It'll be interesting to see what they do with the, notions of immigration as the topic has changed in the political realm over this upcoming years. It could be just a complete disaster and fall on its face and be completely un-PC and just, never really elaborate on the kind of sensibilities that you would hope could be coming from a 2020 version of Coming to America. But this cast seems incredible. This seems like a smart cast. Like, you've not only got Eddie Murphy reprising his role, you've also got Arsenio Hall coming back, and you've got a whole bunch of new faces like Leslie Jones, Tracy Morgan, Wesley Snipes, Tiana Taylor, and it was just released Garcelle Beauvais from the Jamie Foxx show is coming to join the fray. This one's going to be a studio release, whereas you're looking at My Name is Dolomite only on Netflix, but maybe there's a strategy behind that, seeing if he can, both resuscitate the studio comedy and exhibition release as well as home release. He's following Adam Sandler's lead, but he's also saying, like, I've got a lot of IP that people are nostalgic for, so I'm going to try come back with it. Looking at Eddie Murphy's recent box office runs, he had an indie movie come out in 2016, and then his last major release was 2012's 1,000 Words, which only made 18 million total, which is absolutely wretched, especially because before that you had Brett Ratner's Tower Heist. Say what you will about Brett Ratner, but for a studio comedy in 2011 to make 78 million, that's pretty big. Like, that was, I think, one of the last big studio comedies to make over 60 or 70 million that wasn't part of an ongoing series or wasn't produced by Judd Apatow. Of course, before that, there were the Shrek movies. Imagine that in 2009 with only 16 mil, and Meet Dave in 2008 with 11.8. This guy has not had a huge hit aside from Tower Heist, which was arguably an ensemble film, and also had the action element to draw people in. But his last studio comedy, Eddie Murphy starring role that was a hit, is Norbit back in 2007. So it is rough, guys. It's rough. Thanks for listening. If I had to guess, maybe Coming to America could eke out 65 at the theaters, especially if it gets good critic reception. My name is Chris. This has been the Wildline Time Machine. It's back to Dan. Appreciate it. I'll see you back next week.
All right, that was the Time Machine with Chris. What a great little segment there. I love that segment. So much fun. I remember seeing Sixth Sense when it came out. I saw it second weekend it came out. I was down to August on a family vacation. And I'd for some reason, it's burnt into my head the entire experience because it was such an amazing experience to see it in a full theater with people and no one had any idea of the twist. And we're all just like, what is going on? I remember walking into the theater in this daze. It was probably one of those movies that really crystallized my love for cinema. And it's not art house or anything like that, but it was such a visceral and communal experience seeing that movie. And it was the only thing that people were talking about for months afterwards. So that was an awesome time back in 1999. I don't remember Mickey Blue Eyes at all. I remember the name. I don't think I've ever seen a clip of the movie. I don't think I've ever seen a trailer. So that was a really odd one in sort of box office history and film history. Of the movies that he talked about for what's coming out probably the next couple of years or a year or so, I do like Uncharted's chances of doing well. I think we need a new Indiana Jones series. Uncharted was essentially a game based on Indiana Jones movies, so I have high hopes for it. Now, the video game curse is something that is so bizarre to me. And one of our other friends, me and Chris's friends, Andy, he brought up the point on our friendly Slack that we have that video games have this built-in IP, and there's this massive sort of group of people that are engaged with the story, right? It's why is it not like MCU? Why is it not like the comic book DCEU stuff where there's these frenzied fanboys who love this stuff and will see it no matter what and show up? That does not happen for video games, and it is kind of bizarre when you think about it. But video games are an active experience on some level. It's different. You play the movie when you're playing the game. When the Tomb Raider movie came out, there were two of them maybe. The last one I was I had played that game and I was a lot of this just feels like me kind of watching somebody else play the game on some level, if that makes sense. So maybe that's why there's an underperformance with those. But I do feel like Uncharted is such a good story. And I really want to see what they do with it. I hope, and they lost the director obviously, but it is a great sort of story to tell. So I do think that one, I hope it's going to do well. Ghost Draft sounds ridiculous. Coming to America, I don't think it's going to do very well. I love Eddie Murphy. He's obviously a genius, but like he does not have the pull that he did 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago at all. And he kind of has this sort of regal respect within the comedy world for being one of the funniest guys ever. But like that's not going to translate over to the general public. They know Eddie Murphy, but is Eddie Murphy around? No. Is he ever in the public? No. Is he ever like in any like TV show? No. He's kind of been a recluse for the last 15 years or whatever. And I just don't see Coming to America doing all that well because of that, because he's just not an A-lister anymore. In any event, great segment. Love it. Let's close out the show and talk about what's going to happen over the next few weeks at the box office. So obviously next weekend, it's the end of the summer. I don't think I'm going to do a normal show next weekend. I think I'm going to do, probably a split a summer box office review and then fall movie preview in one show just to knock it out, because the weekend after is going to be it. I'm going to want to talk about that. So next weekend we'll do that as sort of a special episode to close out summer 2019. It's been a really interesting summer. I think it started off very strong, obviously, and then there's a little bit of fade here in the middle that I did not expect. And then we'll talk about what's coming on with the fall here. I mean, obviously what's coming up is It Chapter 2. And there's been a lot of back and forth about how this thing is going to do. I don't know, but my gut says it's not going to perform as well as people think. What does that mean? I don't know. Like now I'm like backtracking because I was pretty set in the fact that it was not going to open as big as the original, which is kind of a stupid thing to say, but I just had like a gut feeling about it. Now I'm like maybe pulling back on that a bit. The reviews aren't really good. It's a really long movie. It sounds like it's a little bit overwrought, overstuffed. The reviews are middling, I would say, overall. So that's going to hurt its legs a bit. Is that really going to hurt its box office opening weekend? Maybe not. Probably not. But here's my take on it. It's going to be massive. It's going to be huge. It's going to be a big milestone for horror films because it's going to be the second rated R horror film to open over $100 million. The first one was the first. That's huge. If you're a horror movie fan like I am, like that's a big freaking deal for us because like horror movies have always been the ghetto of filmmaking. And every once in a while, a film will come along that'll do quite well. And then horror will then disappear back into like the outhouse of film. With this though, you're gonna have two rated R horror movies back to back making $100 million in a series opening weekend. That's a huge deal. So I think it's gonna break the $100 million mark, I think, opening weekend, but legs I think are gonna be hurt by the lower quality, it sounds like, and I just don't think the hype is the same level. So my guess would be like opens at, let's say, 120, closes out at maybe 310 or something. Let's guess maybe 300. I don't think it's gonna have a great multiplier. Horror movies in general don't have great multipliers, and if it's not a great movie and a really awesome movie, then like obviously people are gonna keep showing up. So it's gonna be massive no matter what. It's gonna be one of the biggest horror films of all time, easily. Then you got Goldfinch and Hustlers coming out. I think Hustlers is the 13th. Goldfinch, I don't know, has the built-in audience from the book, but the movie looks pretty good. I've heard a lot of buzz from people who've read the book, but wide audience, I don't know. It's a stretch. And also remember, September is one of the slowest months of the movies. Like it's down there with like February and January. So it's going to be pretty quiet here. The 20th gets really fascinating. Then we get Ad Astra, which I've heard things that it's amazing. I've also heard things that it's an absolute mess. They don't know which cut to release. So that's all over the place. I have no idea how that's going to do, but I'm going to go see it. Brad Pitt, right? Come on. Sci-fi thriller. I don't know. From Fox too. Again, is Disney dropping the ball with marketing Ad Astra? Are they just letting it die on the vine? I don't know what's going on, but I think it's going to be a fascinating release nonetheless. Rambo Last Blood, whatever. Why? He's so old. Like he just needs to retire. Like I was watching First Blood. It was on AMC. It's like always on AMC. And I was like, this movie's so freaking good. First Blood is amazing. It is amazing action movie. One of the better ones I think ever released. And they keep doing these. So he needs to pass the baton to somebody else for this stuff. I don't know what he's doing. Downton Abbey movie. Of those, Ad Astra, Downton Abbey, Rambo Last Blood. I guess Rambo's going to win. I don't know. Ad Astra could make anywhere from like $15 million to like $30 million. I have no clue what it's going to do. And that's honestly, that's kind of it for September. God, is it light? The last weekend we have Abominable, which is I guess animated about the snowman or something. I don't know, whatever. Yeti. So it's a very light September. Kind of like it's like too light almost. It reminds me of like August 2017. There's nothing coming out. But then things kick off in October with Joker. Also War. I don't know this one. Wide release in the second. It might be a Bollywood movie. I'm making that up. And so yeah, super light September. Joker kicks off October. Then you have Gemini Man, Addams Family on the 11th. Zombieland 2 Double Tap on the 18th. Black and Blue Countdown, Last Full Measure on the 25th. Wow, it is a very strange fall. The summer felt pretty typical this year. This fall feels weird. Like September and October are very light, and then we are just fucking stacked in November. It's disgusting. This November is disgusting. Let me just go through them. Arctic Dogs, Harriet, Motherless Brooklyn, Terminator, Dark Fate. That's one weekend. Next weekend it's Doctor Sleep, Last Christmas, Midway, Playing with Fire. The weekend after, All Rise, Charlie's Angels, Ford vs. Ferrari, The Good Liar. Then 21 Bridges on the 22nd, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood on the 22nd, Frozen 2 on the 22nd, and the 27th, the mid-release of Knives Out. Yeah, it's going to be insane. It's going to be insane November, but it's going to be kind of a quiet September and October. That's your a brief taste of a fall movie preview. In any event, thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast, and I will be back next weekend with a summer movie recap, box office recap, and a traditional full fall movie preview. Thank you.